Well, I'd like to welcome Frank Booth here this morning. We're in Baltimore at the annual meeting of the American College of Sports Medicine, and we're interviewing Frank as part of ACSM's Distinguished Leaders in Sports Medicine and Exercise Science. And welcome. Thank you for coming, Frank.
I'm glad to be here.
And speaking of distinguished leaders, let's start with the start. And you're going to be getting the honor award tonight.
Yes.
So that's pretty exciting.
Yes, it is.
And so the three things that I want to go over is your early background,
Okay.
Your training, where you went to school, who you worked with, that type of thing. And then at what point in your career did you discover and intersect with the American College of Sports Medicine, and the things you've done in association with the college over time. And then lastly, if we have time at the end, maybe just some comments on the college since you joined and the changes and where we're at and where we may go and things like that. So that's sort of what I had in mind, and
Okay.
if that's okay.
Fine.
With you?
Yep.
Okay. So where did you grow up? High school? All
Okay,
that?
I was born in Akron, Ohio. Somewhere 3rd or 4th grade, we moved to Columbus, Ohio. And that's where I went to high school at Upper Arlington High School, suburban Columbus. I went to college in Denison University in Granville, Ohio.
Okay.
I graduated there in 1965.
And what did you study there, Fred? What was your major?
Biology.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And that probably was the point where I decided to become an exercise physiologist, because I was studying to be a pre-med major, and my biology advisor, Robert Hallbrick, also happened to be the assistant swim coach.
Oh, okay.
And so when we go on bus trips, evidently he learned that I had an interest in, that I didn't realize, like in metabolism. In fact, one of my senior thesis, I don't think I have it anymore, was actually something on metabolism. So one day we interacted frequently. It just wasn't an appointment day. It was more, anytime we would run into each other, we would talk. And one day he said, here's a flyer that looks just like what you want to do. And it was the announcement of an exercise physiology program at the University of Iowa by Charles Tipton.
Oh, gee. Okay.
And so I would never become an exercise physiologist if I hadn't had Dr. Hallbrick as an advisor and also an assistant swim coach. And we were, so I wouldn't say, it was a good student-teacher relationship.
That is, so were you a swimmer then, Frank?
Probably arguably the worst swimmer on the team. And the only way I made the team was because the first year when I was a freshman, there was no team. So in the sophomore year, about anybody, then the coach couldn't recruit.
Right.
So they just had to take anybody.
Okay. Now, did you do other sports in high school, or did they have a competitive swimming team in high school?
And I was arguably the worst swimmer on the high school.
So you're consistent, right?
I'm consistent, right. And I have some other stories, but I'm going to tell them tonight at the banquet about my illustrious sports career,
Okay.
which is usually finishing in the bottom.
But that's pretty neat. So it was, now was the swimming coach then a professor in biology?
Yes. No, the Dr. Hallbrick was a professor in biology, and the swim coach was just a regular, swim coach.
Okay.
at Denison University.
Did they have a physical education program there at the time? So he wasn't involved with that?
No. He was just interested, since it was, anybody can, in the sophomore year, anybody could come in and help, and he wanted to come in and help. And we would go on bus trips together, and we'd sit together, when we went to swim meets around Ohio. And I guess we talked a lot about, biology and exercise and things like that. And I guess I remember talking to him, or he thinks I remember talking to him about, well, what happens when you train? What's going on? Why all this stuff? So he was a very inquisitive person. He was actually studied fish behavior. But he was a great person.
Yeah. So you get the flyer about Iowa.
Yes.
then what?
I actually applied,
Applied.
and I can remember I got on a train and went from the middle of Ohio to Iowa City to see what it was before I, knew what was
And
happening.
you still went,
I
right?
still went. Yeah, I can remember walking around Iowa City in the rain and everything.
And what
that's
year
where I
was
met-
that again, Frank?
That would be probably the spring of 1965.
Okay, okay. And then you started that fall
Yes,
of 65.
yes.
And this was initially for a master's?
No,
Or
it was straight PhD.
It was a straight,
Oh,
okay.
actually, what I got was what was called a National Defense Education Act, and there's some significance in that because that was the time of Sputnik,
Yes.
and the country
yeah.
felt that, or at least someone felt that it was important to train people in exercise since the country was in danger in the Cold War, and which is why I bring it up. Is in contrast to now where we have threats and so forth,
Yeah.
and there's not that interest
Yeah,
in the
good point.
country in making sure our troops are really fit. And you know all this. You know all the data that the troops coming in are less fit. They can't-
Absolutely.
particularly like in the Marines, a lot of them can't make it, and
Right.
then there's a lot more injuries and basic training. All that's been lost. The interest in that John Kennedy had in physical fitness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
I see it every
sort
day.
of that was probably something to do with John Kennedy's interest. Because it was 65 and he was shot in 63.
Yeah. Was
And
there
so-
scholarship money then, Frank?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
Yeah, it was a paid scholarship, I think, for 3 or 4 years.
and what was it called again?
National Defense Education Act.
Okay. And now, is that something that Iowa told you about, or had you known that?
That was
coming in?
something I didn't, I can't remember, but it was just something that came along with it.
Yeah, sure.
And I wasn't
Okay.
experienced enough at that time to know, oh, that's great, they're going to pay for my
Right.
education and I don't have to.
Yeah, yeah. So you get to Iowa City,
That's correct.
and start this program, and Charlie Tipton was the head of it.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the program, the classes,
Okay.
classmates.
Okay. I think the real important thing is and we just had a roast for James Barnard 2 nights ago because he's going to be retiring. Jim Barnard and Merle Foss were the first 2 graduate students. And Jim basically went through and broke down all the doors because, when the story was in biochemistry, the professor would say, what are you doing in this class? You're an exercise person. This is biochemistry, and Jim ended up getting A's in the course. So when I followed his footsteps, not only was he a good mentor, but he had broken all the prejudice against the fact, oh, you're an exercise person, you aren't a Ph.D. in biochemistry or something.
But-
You're not going for that.
But
So
Frank, was the department then in physiology or in physical
was in
education or
both.
both?
It was in
It
both.
was in both. Okay.
And Dr. Tipton set high academic standards. He would have you take his maximal course load or sometimes more than the maximal course load and tell us that's average.
Right. Okay. So was Ken Baldwin there then? or
Yeah,
when?
Ken was there and Ron Turian were there. So
Okay.
we were together then as a trio, not only as graduate students, but some of our postdoc. They both went and did their postdoc first with John Hollisey. I went and did a postdoc at the School of Aerospace Medicine and then came back to John Hollisey. So we
Okay.
were together
Wow,
at
yeah.
least 7 years. We were in the lab together.
And you and Ron are together again, right?
Yes, we're at the University of Missouri. His office is right across the hall from me.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in recruiting me to go to the University
Wow,
of
that's-
Missouri.
So when you were working with Tipton, then what was going on in the lab? Was there sort of one thing that
Yeah, there were at least 2 experiments. Dr. Tipton was doing some work with exercising dogs and looking at hormones. And Merle and Jim both were using dogs on treadmills and so forth. And I don't know if this is appropriate, but one of the interesting stories is if you, when they were running the dog on the treadmill and you were new, they would say, well, stand behind the treadmill and catch the dog if it comes off. Well, you know, they could tell if the dog's pace changed a little bit what was going to happen next.
Yeah, they knew
and you
what
would,
you were
you
going to
would be
catch.
catching something other than the dog. So that's how you were broke into that,
Right.
into that part. I worked on ligaments because Dr. Tipton, I think, had a grant in ligaments and the effect of exercise on ligaments. So we looked at ligament strength in animals, and I learned to run animals in wheels and so forth. And so there were at least 2 projects going on. Dr. Tipton had his own project on what, you know, people losing weight and setting standards, don't lose too much weight. But none of us, I think, were really involved in that.
Is that when he was looking at the wrestlers?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So there were a lot of projects going on in the lab, and it was really exciting time. And again, I can't emphasize that Jim Barnard mentored, you know, Baldwin and Young and myself, and really got us together and going the right direction.
So it must have been this time that you heard about ACSM.
Yes. Again, it's hard to remember, but it was just like, okay, this is part of what you're here to do. Right. You're going to go, you know. And so I can't remember exactly what the first meeting was, but Dr. Tipton was sort of in the leadership, and it was very small then. It was just a couple hundred people.
I think he said the other day in the business meeting that basically they weren't interested in students much at the time, and he was trying to get students involved, and perhaps you were one of the earliest student members. I think he said 1968, which would be pretty close to what you're saying.
I probably didn't go the first year or 2. Maybe I was a graduate student, yeah. But it's just one of those things. We were breaking ground, so it's one of those things, you know, okay. You know, I think there's stories, you know, they didn't want students in, and there were stories about, you know, there was this Albuquerque incident where they rejected all the animal abstracts.
Yes.
And we went on and had our session anyway. It was called the pink sheet session because our abstracts were on pink sheets, and, you know.
What year was that?
That would be the year of Kent State, probably 69 or 70.
Okay, but the meeting was in Albuquerque.
Yeah, I remember definitely that.
That's when...
that was the year of Kent State killings.
Okay. And I'm drawing a blank on his name at WSU.
Phil Golnick.
Phil Golnick and Tipton sort of had their own meeting.
Yes, because so, you know, going back to being the first graduate student, that was just, you know, part of the attitude in the lab. You know, that was part of the training. You know.
So were you one of the pink ones that year?
I don't think so. I don't think I gave an abstract, but
okay.
You know, I was involved in the handing them out at least.
Yeah.
To everybody here come to this session, but. But yeah, so it was just norm in the lab, you know. Exercise physiology up to that point was basically measuring blood lactate. And here we were starting to do biochemistry of exercise. So then no one was really doing it other than we found out in 67, you know. I was the first in the lab to go see, in the Journal of Biological Chemistry, John Holsey has this paper on biochemical adaptations to exercise.
Oh, wow.
And that was very exciting.
Yeah.
And that was almost the same time that famous bed rest study about Saltine and Mitchell came out, and everybody was looking. So it was really a frontier time. So to do things differently, and maybe that's what was part of my training. I'm not afraid to do things differently.
Yeah.
It was a norm. So when you asked my question about why you were the first student,
that's just the way it was.
Well, yeah, we were doing a lot of firsts, and you don't think about it.
Yeah, I know. That's really neat. So. So you get your Ph.D. And then you went. What year was that? Then
that would be 1970.
Okay, and then you went. Was it a NASA?
No, NASA
space?
Wasn't really there then. Around.
What was
they
it
were
called?
Around,
You
it
said
was
it
called
earlier.
the School of Aerospace Medicine in San Antonio.
Okay.
And there was a person there by Frank Leacock, and he'd done some papers on bed rest of
Okay.
humans and found that insulin sensitivity fell very rapidly in bed rest, and that really excited me because another outcome of that year was of Sputnik was space flight, and you know, it was really an exciting thing to. So that's what I really wanted to understand was physical inactivity. So my interest in
Yes.
physical inactivity is evidently led to my first postdoc at the School of Aerospace Medicine.
Okay, and how long did you stay there?
That was about 2.5 years, and
Wow.
I decided that I wasn't getting real mentorship there. I was doing things. I actually did a human bed rest study and so forth, but it really wasn't a lot of supervision. So and I knew the people were already, Baldwin and Turyoung were already at, John Hollisey's lab. So
Oh, they went there then?
first,
Okay,
and then
okay.
I just followed them along.
Okay, I didn't know that. All right, and then that's in St. Louis.
That's correct.
And when were you there then?
I was there about 2.5 years too, so that would be a 5-year postdoc.
Wow, and what were some of the things John was doing and what were you doing when you went there?
Basically, it was interesting. My first project, I was going to look at use the rate of the increase in the mitochondrial enzymes to try to estimate does exercise itself, exercise training, alter the rate of synthesis or degradation of mitochondria. So how are mitochondria increasing in muscle? And we used swimming, and the animals swam 6 hours a day, and we had to monitor them and keep the temperature about the same and so forth. And what was interesting in that study that came out is that the animals, when they swam, didn't increase the mitochondria like they increased it with running.
Oh,
And so it only increased 25%. So if you're looking at the rate of increase and then the rate of decline, you don't have the sensitivity because the value, you're so close to your control groups. So all that data went in the wastebasket. So my first year as a postdoc, that was a good learning experience too.
don't use swimming.
Well, it's like, okay, sometimes the experiments don't work out and you just have to move on. So then I went and did it in running. And that was a pretty
Clear.
then we got 100% increase in the mitochondria. We were able to plot the rise and the fall. And then we were able to show that then by that the rise and the fall had the same half-life. So the conclusion was that the rate of protein degradation is not increasing, at least for the cytochrome C protein or some of the enzyme activities with the exercise and using that. Because there weren't radioisotopes then to look at protein turnover or anything. So this is a model that you could just look at the time the protein concentrations increased or decreased.
And that's pretty advanced stuff for that time.
Yes, it was. I mean, that paper did get published in the Journal of Biological Chemistry.
Yeah.
It was advanced because it
Yeah.
was sort of a mechanistic approach.
Yeah. I had forgotten, what did you do your dissertation on back at Iowa?
That was on ligaments, effective
Okay.
exercise, and I actually tried to look at the rate of protein synthesis in the ligaments during running. And again, that was very early on, and the techniques weren't that very good.
Yeah, not sophisticated.
Not sophisticated enough,
Yeah.
but I did use some radioisotopes at that time to start to try to see is more hydroxyproline labeled with a label radioactive label proline. So that's what the dissertation was.
Okay, and Tip was your advisor,
That's
I
correct.
assume? Okay. So after you leave John's lab, what's the next stop?
Well, the next stop was a brand new medical school. It was only a couple years old in Houston, Texas. Its official name was the University of Texas Medical School at Houston. And so my first lab was in an old converted apartment building, 13-story apartment
Wow.
building, because they were still building the
Was
medical
this in
school
the
building.
Department of Physiology?
Yes, it was the Department of Physiology at the medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were just like maybe less than 50 students at that time. By the time I left, there were 200 students. So
Okay.
it was quite a growth.
And what did you, what kind of research, did you just keep up the same type of thing when you went there initially from John's lab?
Yes, basically, and I was interested in adaptations to exercise and inactivity both. So that was my first types of studies.
So did you go from there then to Missouri? Where
After
you are now?
24 years.
After
Okay.
we skipped right through that.
That's right.
So
Well, just a quarter of a century.
I assume you stayed involved in ACSM all along.
Right, and in fact, in John's lab in St. Louis, I had gotten quite involved in ACSM at that point, and I guess my involvement in being a small group of people, I could know almost everybody. I was elected to the Board of Trustees as a postdoctoral fellow.
That's right, yeah.
And I was involved in some committee work and so forth, and one of the things that I did was, I don't know if they had exhibits before the Chattanooga ACSM meeting. Someone said it was 73 or 74 maybe, but I actually organized the exhibits, and I was there then managing them and writing companies and so forth. Obviously now it's a more sophisticated process.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there were a lot of things because I was on the board is that, you know, again, the attitude from the Tipton era, you know, let's push the frontier and let's do it right.
Yeah, that's... So did you get involved in any of the ACSM publications, editorial boards and that type of thing? And did you publish in MSSE?
Not much.
Okay.
But I was on a number of editorial boards and so
thought,
forth
yeah.
during my career. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, there's another funny story too on this is that made me decide, well, I may not want to stay as in the leadership role in ACSM was at one meeting I proposed to change the name of the title of the journal and take out the word sports because I felt that that would be derogatory toward getting grant funding. And you know what the vote was? No. How many people were for that?
0, probably.
No, well, I voted for it. There was one.
Besides you, yeah.
There was no more. So I decided at that point that potentially some of my thoughts...
Maybe not such a good idea.
Yeah, well, that maybe, okay, so I didn't really, you know, after that I really dropped out of ACSM leadership sort of in those types of roles, but I've come back into it in later years more we'll get to later. But,
yeah.
So I think a vote was like, say, 20-1. So I was very successful. But other things the board bought.
Was okay.
Yeah, like one of the things I did too was the introductory offer with the registration. That was my idea.
Oh, neat.
And they still have it.
Yeah, that works
So
well.
yeah, I was trying to get more people to join ACSM, so I came up with that as a sales thing, and like how many years later, almost 40 years later, they're still doing that. So the board did buy some of my stuff.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I remember, of course, is the your stance on inactivity.
Yes.
And your wonderful lecture a few years ago basically about that. And I wondered if you could just sort of comment a little bit on I know you were interested in that bed rest study, and so, but it's an interesting approach that really needs pushed along, and you've been the single person, I think, that's really done that. And I wondered if you could go back and talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Well, actually, fortunately, one of the persons that sort of got me interested in that was one of my MD, Ph.D. students in the lab, Brian Zing. He's here at the meeting. We had some time together last night, and basically, this was being the sort of the mid or early 90s, and he was being a medical student. He kept coming in.
You're still in Texas?
I'm in Texas, in the University of Texas Medical School at Houston, and he would come in, and he's very athletic as opposed to me. He's a good athlete, and I'm a bad one. But he'd keep coming in, and he would be asking me questions. We really got to think about the health aspects. You know, that's what I'm studying in medical school. So he got me started on that, and I think it's somewhere along the line I sort of decided that people were not buying for exercise support in the United States, the exercise and health. And I basically, the way I put it was, well, exercise is not the primary initiating cause of disease, it's inactivity.
Yeah.
So if you want to become causal, it became a selling point. And then as I started to collect data on it, it became, well, wow, it's a lot more than I thought. And so there are two ways to look at it: get people to exercise or get people not to be inactive.
Yeah.
And I attended a meeting somewhere, and there was a psychologist at Buffalo, and he had mentioned a comment like, it might be more successful to try to sell a larger percentage of people to become physically active by pushing the inactivity route. So there were things like that.
Good point.
Plus, I'd always had that interest because my first postdoc was in inactivity. So essentially, you know, I've for over 4 decades, I've studied both exercise and inactivity. One of the things I think about lately is there are not many people in the world that have that both together.
Absolutely.
Bink Saltine still does, Ken Baldwin does, but there are very few people that have that length of time studying both of those things together. So I have certain insights about both processes. I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
But it's just another way to do the same thing. But
Yes.
it makes more sense. It
It
should make
does.
more sense
Yeah, I
to
think it
biologists
does.
that we are an important profession
Yeah.
because we are the cause of disease, and it's an inactivity that is a cause of a lot of these problems. And if you get rid of inactivity, and I think some of the things that are going on in social policy are basically based on that. You know, people can't be active because you have cul-de-sacs.
We have barriers to
Yeah,
being
there's no
active.
sidewalks, so the barriers to being active, and that's we're making the people inactive. So I think,
Yeah.
there's a whole bit. Actually, what I found is if you study both, you have greater insights
Oh.
than studying each alone.
Absolutely.
It gives you greater knowledge.
Yeah, and it's a more powerful argument too,
Yes.
because it's double pronged, basically,
That's
saying
right.
the same thing, but
Yeah.
in a different way.
Yes.
So, one of the books that I have on my shelf is Hot Topics
That's right.
and Exercise.
Yes.
And I show students that all the time. Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. Wonderful book. I really think it's a timely book. How did that come about? Just evolved out of all of it?
Actually, someone in Philadelphia, the company, during the process, actually was bought up by a larger company, but she called me on the phone and said, this is interesting, we're doing a hot topic series, would you do it on exercise? I tried to get the title Physical Inactivity, and they said, well, that isn't going to sell. So, yeah, so that's how it basically got started. We were contacted by a publisher to do it, and it happened to be I had another really sharp and intelligent MD, Ph.D. in the lab at that time, Manu Chakravarti. And as I often do on these projects, because I know a second opinion is good, I pull in someone in the lab that I think would do a good job. So he became co-author on that, and we worked on that thing and put her out, and that's, it's almost 10 years since we started the project because it's copyrighted in 03.
Is that right? Gee, that's a very neat book. And now you've started a physical inactivity group, right? What is that called?
It's called Researchers Against Inactivity-Related Diseases.
Okay.
And it took a year to get the name because you have to have an anachronism. So it's RID.
RID. Yeah, because there were people the other day talking about a RID meeting, and I finally asked Tipton, what does RID mean? He goes, that's Booth's thing. Then I knew.
That's, again, a forefront thing. That was basically, how are we going to promote it? No one else is promoting it, and how can we do it within ACSM? And so the ACSM has been very patient and allowed us to sort of develop. There's, like at this year's meeting, there were only 20 people there. There were 300 members, but we're tackling certain problems. How can we help to ACSM to direct them and how to get more people in the government circles interested in exercise and inactivity as an important area to study or to provide government taxpayers money. It's important, and more people, there should be more emphasis on that. So that's what RID's basically doing.
So do you remember when you started that? What year?
That would probably be started over 10 years ago, most likely.
Wow, okay. And I forgot what it's called. It's one of ACSM's recognized, what are they called?
I do not know. For a while it wasn't recognized.
There's a list of...
There may be an affiliated organization.
Yeah, something like that. But the point is it's been formed and operates under the auspices of ACSM. I mean, you guys, all the members meet at the annual meeting.
Right, and they give us meeting space, but really it's more independent than auspices. I wouldn't use that term. It's a
Yeah.
cooperation.
Yeah.
And I might point out that one of the turning points was actually occurred in Baltimore, and it would actually probably be in 2001.
Yeah, I was going to say that's about 10 years ago. So.
Right, and we organized a bus trip down to Capitol Hill, and I had a undergrad student in the lab, Tom Childs, and I just put him in charge of this project, and he organized to get, the bus, 40 people on the bus, over 100, I think it was close to 120 interviews with people on Capitol Hill and try to sell the idea. And I think that someone mentioned earlier this week that sort of opened up the idea, I think, in ACSM that we need to be more active on Capitol Hill. And we didn't really, everything we tried to get, we didn't get, but it was more or less okay. It was interesting. We went down that morning and came back that afternoon, and it was we talked to 120 staff members.
So who all went on that
It's
trip
hard to
with you?
remember.
Yeah, but
I do remember my departmental chair and his wife went down, I think, Harold Laughlin and Lynn Laughlin, but there were a lot of people.
But people from the ACSM meeting. Though.
That's right. They were registrants, and we just took a day off of the meeting and went down.
Okay. Do you have a newsletter or anything
Not
for that
really.
group, or
No.
Just, no?
We have infrequent email notices because I'm in charge of almost everything on that organization.
And it's
not run
always
out of
not
time.
the top of your to-do list.
That's right.
Well, wow! I just realized that time has flown here. I knew it. It always does. Sort of in wrapping up, you're winning the honor award again tonight, which is wonderful. Which sort of a testimony to a lot of what you've just said, and congratulations on that. And do you have any feeling looking at ACSM over this whole time? Like, are things going okay? Where are we now? Where should we go? Any feelings on that?
Well, I think ACSM has made a commitment in the last year to try to be more serious about working to try to get support on Capitol Hill for funding to understand why inactivity causes disease. If you look at tobacco, for example, there's an interesting association that for many, many years before, say, 1995, tobacco companies said cigarettes do not cause cancer. You have no molecular link. And then in 1995, there's a science paper that said there is a carcinogen in cigarette smoke. It causes a change in P53, which is a tumor suppressor that would make the more likely, but the change in it would make it not a tumor suppressor and contribute to cancer. And then within 5 months, there was a cigarette company, Liggett and Myers, that admitted that there was a molecular link, and they agreed to pay, with other cigarette companies, eventually over $300 billion. And so I take the same strategy. If we could find the molecular link between inactivity and disease, then it will drive legislation, because you can go out and you can say, do this, do that, but you can't go out. You can tell people to exercise, but you can't tell the Baltimore to build more sidewalks or to build more parks or so forth. You have to have the local people have to be able to say, well, this causes this, and most environmental changes that have occurred from health problems have occurred because of legislation. In fact, there's one website that says all things have come, but they have to come through science. So there's a behavioral science. We'll figure out how people to do it, but if you don't have that other part, it's a complex thing. So
I see.
So what needs to be done in the future is to really find that molecular link that says, when we're here sitting, our bodies are changing, and if we sit all day, when there is some data we're collecting now, this is what's bad. This is what's occurring in us, and then we can take that down to Capitol Hill or into regulatory offices and get regulations that, if you provide people with alternate means, they may be on their own, they'll become more physically active.
And as you were saying, ACSM has really stepped up
Yes.
in that kind of role of
Right.
realizing that this is what's got to be done.
Right, it's basically the rates of people being physically active is in leisure time hasn't changed, and it's gone down, and that's why we have childhood obesity,
Yeah.
because the time watching TV's gone up,
Right.
and kids don't play anymore.
Inactivity.
Yeah, inactivity. So basically, how are you going to really convince huge corporations with a lot of money that they can't make money off of certain things, and we have to do other things? So you really need that science
Yeah.
that shows that this is really bad for
This
the
is what's
kids.
happening.
And a lot of people in the public may sort of know it, but they really don't believe it enough. And that's where ACSM is going to try to get the policy to give us the money to do the science to really get the complete picture.
Absolutely.
And someone once mentioned that the hardest part is going to be not, getting social changes. It's going to be to get the people to realize we need the research to get this, to substantiate the fact that it's not window dressing we're doing.
This
It's
is
actually,
real.
This is real. This is real hurting the body.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, Frank, time just went very, very, very fast, so I appreciate very much you coming and talking with us today, and thanks again.
Well, thanks for you taking in charge of this project and having a living memory.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really been fun.